I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations. Yeah. Groovy vibes, man. You know, I always liked the Beach Boys. You can drive down the coast, the ocean beside you, and it's like riding on the crest of a thought. You can feel a real sense of freedom. Also a desire just to camp up and feel the sand between your toes. Crack a brew. Just catch a wave and chill. I always thought that the Smile Sessions was one of the Beach Boys' best albums. That's not to say I particularly like it, but I'm fascinated by it. Because it was, I wouldn't say raw, but it was an experiment. And it had a troubled production history, to say the least. It was experimental, and Brian Wilson's passion, it was evident. His music, it always played like a symphony. I think he recorded up to around 90 hours in the studio, just on good vibrations. And people, they said his approach was primitive and chaotic, but utter genius when it came to composition. But Brian, he wrestled with mental issues. It was said to be manic depression and schizophrenia. He said he heard voices. And Brian suffered a lot of trauma in his life. His father was abusive and very violent. Brian recounted numerous times when his father would beat him. And Brian, as a boy, he got so fed up with it that one time he took a shit on a plate and put it down in front of his father at the dinner table, saying, "Here's your dinner, Dad." I thought that was pretty original. And Brian later on, he took drugs to try and cope with the past and with his mental issues. He ended up being exploited by a therapist for many years who kept him cut off from family and from friends. But he finally managed to break free and get his life back. I read once that trauma is an expulsive cataclysm of the soul. I thought that was a really great way of putting it, especially in regards to men. I was watching a documentary on Netflix the other night. The name of the documentary was Resurface. It was about returned combat veterans. And many of the veterans, they were suffering from physical wounds from combat. Some had missing limbs, they could barely walk. Others were deaf from landmines, or they couldn't see 2 feet in front of themselves. And others were right on the brink, mentally. The PTSD, depression, guilt. And some have been suicidal. The documentary focused on these veterans joining a surf club ran by the veterans. And the reason behind surfing as a means of therapy for these men was that trauma resides in the body. In order to address and work through and with the trauma, men need to connect with the physical. And that's a very male need. Men express through action, and they need to be engaged physically. I thought they put it very well in the documentary that the human body is like a pharmacy. It produces huge amounts of dopamine and adrenaline during a stressful event. And likewise through an activity like surfing, when you're really going up against it, and you're wrestling with physical trauma and physical ailments. And everyone's heard of survivor guilt. Survivor's guilt, we know what that is. And we typically visualize a combat veteran who's been through it. It's most prevalent when a soldier he commits an act such as taking the life of a child in the field of battle, either directly or indirectly. And it's a pervasive and debilitating sense of shame and guilt. Often when we think about PTSD with veterans, we tend to visualize John Rambo, having flashbacks to being a POW before he rage quits and goes feral up in the mountains. But with veterans, often it's not manifested as flashbacks when they disassociate, but rather they re-experience the feelings of fear and helplessness, the same that they had during the event. And it's like a system override. Now, everything gets notched up to 100 miles an hour. And now suddenly they're hurtling down a highway with no brakes. It's terrifying for them. It's like they're held hostage in their own body. Soldiers, soldiers can experience a profound sense of betrayal. They can feel like they've been lied to, that they've been exploited, or that they've crossed the line. It's what's referred to as a transgression. That what they've done or what they've been part of is so abhorrent in their mind that there's no way back, or means of redemption. And they can feel violated. They don't know where they stand now. A young soldier can find his ideals compromised. He can find them absolutely shattered in the field. He can find that lines are getting crossed all the time. But there is a process for healing for veterans. It's awareness. It's identification, disclosure, acceptance, and forgiveness. It's awareness of how a soldier can be affected by the act of killing, and what that looks like. And then identifying those thoughts, then venturing into group disclosure with other veterans, acceptance without shame, and then finally forgiveness. And there has to be accountability. They need to accept what happened, and the part that they played in it. And it's all about progression and acceptance so you can move forward with your life. And a big part of that healing process is learning to engage again with your environment and with other people, and to be open to building and fostering those relationships. Because trauma is very sneaky. Men I've known who have wrestled with PTSD or prior sexual and physical abuse, the pain, the physical pain, can become chronic. It breaks them down mentally and physically. And many do live in chronic pain. Physical tension, it riddles the body and aggravates the PTSD and overall mental and long-term physical health. It leads to a lot of long-term illness. And of course, many struggle with addiction. And one of the questions I always like to ask a man is, why do you drink? Why do you take drugs? Oftentimes it's simply a case of, because it's there. It's there for them when no one else is. And the drugs don't give the kick like they used to. The effects lessen, but a person can momentarily escape system override. But, of course, it can often just exacerbate things. It can sometimes result in a lot of carnage, to others and to self. Why'd you put that person's head through a wall? Why'd you stomp that random chap on the street? And often it's difficult for men who act out to articulate. But, how can you expect others to understand you when you don't understand yourself? So with men, the why is just as important as the how. Because for males, the structure and process of treatment, it has to be clear. But most importantly, men need to be sure that what they are experiencing can be improved with treatment. It's like they have to be able to reach out and physically touch the end goal first before they can even consider starting treatment. It needs to be tangible. And for them, it's the equivalent of having an operation and cutting out a cancer. That's why a lot of talk therapy, it doesn't work for men. It's just too wishy-washy and foreign to them. And the language, it's too female. I always forget song lyrics. I can usually remember the first verse, but I usually just end up humming the rest of the song. And it's hard to sing a song if you don't have the words. And that's what it's like for men who are suffering from PTSD. How can you ask for what you need if you don't understand what is going on inside you? Men, they typically wait until the pain becomes just completely unbearable before they reach out for help. And of course, it's hard to blame them when all they receive is antagonism and blaming and shaming when they do reach out. All they know in the moment is that things are spinning out of control and that they feel powerless to stop it. So it's hard for that man to be around people when he feels he's going to explode at any second, or his body is so ridden with anxiety that he can't function. People kill themselves because they want to make the pain stop. But of course, whenever you bring up the issue of male suicide, there's always that classic retort you're going to hear back. Yeah, well, women attempt suicide more. I recall a woman saying that to a Vietnam veteran I knew. I was sitting right beside him at the time. And the people in the room, they were concerned over the health of a young man who'd gone missing. Everybody was worried. But it turns out he didn't take his life, thankfully, but apparently it was touch and go. But anyway, this woman flies off with this veteran who raised the issue of male suicide. But he was taking a pragmatic approach to the situation. Where was the boy last seen? Who are his friends? Let's contact them, come on. And he raised the very relevant point that young males are more likely to kill themselves, in order to frame the situation in relation to the level of present risk. But of course, she gives a standard response, with a thinly veiled, self-satisfied smirk. Well, women attempt suicide more. And the veteran shouted back at her, "Yeah? You ever had to clean one up?" I thought that was a pretty sharp comeback. Because when it comes to suicide, men, they don't just take their life. Men obliterate themselves. And just look at their chosen means of suicide. Take a moment and put yourself in the mind of a man who takes his head off with his shotgun. All I keep seeing is that male suicide rates are rising. Suicide rates are the highest they've been since World War II. And suicides for some demographics of males, they're almost doubled over the past 10 years. Who's that policeman, what's that cartoon? South Park. The officer in it, what's his name? Officer Bob Bradley or whatever. Says, "Okay, people, move along. Nothing to see here, folks, just move along." Yes, well, I would tend to disagree. Something is definitely going on. How can a doctor treat a condition without a correct diagnosis? If a patient needs an appendectomy, but the doctor tells him it's all in his head, just hands him some aspirin and just tells him to go on his way, the underlying issue remains. It's only going to grow in severity until it's unbearable. And then the patient takes matters, into his own hands. You see a man in tears. Now, a lot of times the instinctive response from people is disgust. That disgust can manifest in some pretty shitty behaviour being directed at that male. Because now he's the weak link. Better kick him up the arse and make him fall back in line. Get back in your place, cog, and keep grinding. A lot of times, people that they don't know how to help, because they don't have the knowledge or the skills to deal with it. And it can feel like they're walking on eggshells. They're scared if they say or if they do the wrong thing, it's going to make things worse. And of course, it doesn't help that a lot of people won't acknowledge male vulnerability or that these men are actually experiencing PTSD or other mental issues. Because these men, they're continually trying to prove and justify to others that what they're dealing with is real. I've seen cases of men who they're going through PTSD saying that their wife or that the mother-in-law or that their mates either minimize their condition or even mock them for it. So every day is a battle. Get the messages. You don't look sick to me. Come on. Pull yourself together, man. Harden up. Come on, man up. Just get over it. No, it's not all about you. Stop playing the victim. Men sign up to serve their country, to find purpose, an identity, a brotherhood, to learn a trade, to pull themselves out of poverty, to make their family happy, whatever. There's a million reasons why. They signed up for all of the above, and you can ask them straight, and they'll tell you. Many were prepared to die. But they didn't sign up to be tormented by invisible wounds and ridicule. To have their relationships destroyed, and their lives and the lives of those they love left in ruins. But, where can they go? I've known veterans who suffer from severe issues as a result of combat, but if they were given the option, they'd go back into the field in a heartbeat, because they missed the brotherhood that they had with other men. And there's very few places where men can experience that level of brotherhood. Most men, they never will. Because men are separated from one another today. They're isolated. They're self-censoring. They attack other males out of a sense of self-loathing, fear. But many veterans don't have that option to go back. So they're stuck between two worlds. They're too damaged to go back. They're too damaged to function in society. So that war, is internal now. And there's no ceasefire. There's no peace. And there can be a real sense of loss, grief. They miss the little things, like being happy. Happy over little stuff. One veteran, he told me the feeling of pride and happiness he had experienced when his daughter would show him a drawing or a painting she made or something she wrote. Now, he'd beam with pride and with joy. Now when she shows him a drawing, it fills him full of dread and a profound sense of grief, because he can't feel those happy emotions now. And he's scared he'll never experience them again. And he says he's forgotten what joy and happiness feels like. Because now there's no connection to the emotion. He says it feels like he's still over there, like he never came back. I was told once that in the US Army handbook, there's a line in there that reads, anything other than death is psychological. Which means if you're still breathing, you still have a life to live. And it comes down to valuing what's important to you. Valuing and caring for yourself and for others. And care for self, it comes through action. And action is empowerment. And taking action is taking control back. So you're back in the driver's seat, and you've found the brake. In that documentary about the veterans surfing, many of the veterans previously, they'd been plagued by suicidal thoughts, and they were focused on what they had lost. They'd cut themselves off, and they were in a spiral of pain and loss. But now every night, all they could think of was just catching that next wave, perfecting their technique. They were focused on being that much better every single day. About being part of a brotherhood again. About sharing experiences, laughing, sharing stories, knowledge and experiences. And one particular part in the documentary, there was this veteran walking down the beach on crutches, and he was deaf from a landmine. And his vision and his mobility was severely limited. But the swell in the ocean, it was too rough that day, so they couldn't go out. And they were trying to tell him, they said, mate, no, we can't surf today, we can't go out. But he kept looking out at the ocean. And you could see it, and all he wanted to do was get back out there. He wanted it more than anything. And he didn't want to hear no. He didn't want to hear it, because if he's surfing, then that's all there is. He's lost in the moment. So he's focused on that, and there's nothing else. Because out there, he's free. And Brian Wilson, he wrote a song called Till I Die. He said he wrote it after a late night trip to the beach. He said he stared out at the ocean, and he pictured himself as a jellyfish, sitting atop the waves, just riding with the current. And he wanted the music to reflect the vastness of the ocean, and the rhythm to reflect the changing tides, and also the feeling of isolation of being lost in the ocean. And it was said that Brian developed the chords of the song by making geometric patterns with his fingers. And the lyrics, they read, I'm a cork on the ocean. I've lost my way. I'm a rock in a landslide. How deep is the valley? It kills my soul. I'm a leaf on a windy day. Pretty soon I'll be blown away. How long will the wind blow? Until I die. These things I'll be until I die. And for me, it reads like a death of sorts, but freedom from pain. And also that life is fragile and unpredictable. But things are always in motion. Good vibrations.